right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we are going deep on the 2024 election.
Deep, deep, deep.
That's right, deep.
Deep.
We are diving into the potential showdown between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Buckle up, folks.
Yeah, you came to the right place if you want to get past the sound bites, if you want to really understand what is going on beyond just the surface level, because we are going to unpack 7 key issues that could really make or break this election.
And we are going to highlight some of the surprising differences between the two candidates that might surprise even the most informed voter out there.
Right, like you think you know what's going on, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly.
So to kick things off, let's set the stage here. Election analysts are calling this one of the most consequential elections in recent history.
I mean, no pressure or anything.
Yeah, no pressure.
But the future direction of the country kind of hinges on this.
Yeah, the fate of the free world.
The fate of the free world right here.
So it's a big deal, and of course we have got the rematch everyone's been kind of expecting. I guess not really that surprising.
The sequel.
The sequel, right?
To the big blockbuster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Trump is out there dusting off the old Make America Great Again hat.
Part 2.
Part 2, the sequel.
Make America Great Again.
Again, right? He's really leaning into these anxieties that we're seeing around things like immigration and inflation.
Big time. It's a classic strategy hitting those pain points that tend to resonate with voters, especially his base.
So do you think it's going to work again? I mean, we've seen this playbook before.
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely a nostalgia factor for a lot of his supporters, but it remains to be seen whether it will have the same impact this time around. You know, the political landscape has shifted. There are new anxieties, new concerns.
People have election fatigue.
Exactly. So it's a different ballgame now. And Harris, she's really trying to set herself apart.
Trying to make her own path.
Absolutely. She's highlighting areas where she differs from Biden even.
Ooh, stepping out from the shadows.
A little bit. You know, she's emphasizing issues like reproductive rights and safeguarding democratic institutions.
Things that she can really draw a contrast with Trump on.
Exactly. Painting that clear choice for voters.
So it'll be really interesting to see how she walks that tightrope.
Yeah.
You know, because she has to align herself with the current administration.
Of course.
But also carve out her own distinct identity.
It's a delicate dance.
That's a delicate dance.
You know, she's championing a lot of what Biden's done, but she's also not shying away from those areas where she might have taken a different approach.
So subtle differences.
Subtle, but significant, and you see it most clearly in their approaches to the economy.
The economy, everybody's favorite topic.
Right. Always a top issue for voters.
Always.
So Biden's been really big on infrastructure spending.
The big projects.
Right. Bridges, roads, the works.
Yeah, shovel-ready jobs.
Exactly. But Harris, she's putting more emphasis on what she calls family-friendly economics.
Okay, so what does that mean, family-friendly economics?
Think affordable childcare, paid family, leave more direct support for working families.
So appealing to those voters who may feel like those big infrastructure projects aren't really impacting their day-to-day lives.
It's about connecting with voters on a personal level, showing them that their struggles are seen and heard.
It's about putting money in people's pockets.
Exactly, making that economic case for the average American family.
All right, so we've talked about the economy. Let's shift gears a bit and talk foreign policy.
Ah, yes, the global stage.
Because it's always interesting to see how presidents approach this, America's role in the world.
Absolutely, and this is where we see one of the starkest contrasts between Harris and Trump.
Like night and day.
Practically, Trump is sticking to his America First guns.
America First, that's the greatest hits album we were talking about.
Exactly. Tariffs, reassessing alliances like NATO, and a more go-it-alone approach to global conflicts.
So less collaboration, more like...
Less kumbaya, more like America First.
America First.
The major departure from decades of U.S. foreign policy.
So are we talking like full-blown isolationism or just like a recalibration?
It's more of a recalibration, but it's definitely caused some ripples on the world stage. Allies are a little uneasy. Adversaries are watching very closely.
So where does that leave Harris on the global chessboard?
Harris has signaled a return to a more traditional diplomacy-focused approach.
So back to basics.
In a way, she's all about rebuilding those relationships that were strained during the Trump administration, emphasizing alliances and multilateral engagement.
So more of a team player.
Exactly. She sees America's strength in its partnerships and alliances.
But here's where it gets interesting to me, at least, because despite these polar opposite views on the world stage, They actually agree on something.
Oh, you're talking about Israel.
Exactly. Israel, they both have expressed unwavering support.
Unwavering support despite all their differences on everything else.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you that foreign policy is rarely black and white.
So true. There are always these complexities, overlapping interests, and sometimes strange bedfellows.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of complex issues, let's move on to another one that's guaranteed to spark some debate: immigration.
Immigration. Ah, yes. A perennial hot-button issue.
A
A
classic.
classic indeed.
And Trump is not pulling any punches. He's going all in on his secure the border platform.
We've heard this one before.
Oh, yeah. We have the greatest hits album is playing on repeat.
Travel bans, more border wall construction. A significant uptick in deportations.
Deja vu anyone.
It's like we're back in 2016.
Right. But here's where it gets interesting. Harris's stance isn't a complete 180 from Trump's.
Ugh. Tell me more.
Remember, she had that reputation for being tough on immigration when she was Attorney General of California?
Kamala the cop, some called her.
Exactly. Not exactly a bleeding heart liberal.
Not in those days. And her campaign has even hinted at keeping some of those stricter border control measures in place.
So not exactly a tear down this wall moment.
Not quite. It's more nuanced than that. And to make things even more interesting, remember that bipartisan immigration bill that was introduced earlier this year?
The one that everyone thought had a chance.
That's the one it aimed to tackle these complex issues head on. Growing border security, funding some stricter measures to appease both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, it seemed like it actually had a shot at passing.
It really did. But then
Then.
Trump came out swinging against it.
And that was that.
Pretty much killed it dead in the water.
Even from outside the White House, his influence is still being felt.
It's remarkable, isn't it? He still has that power to make or break legislation.
And it just highlights how difficult it is to find common ground on this issue.
It's a microcosm of our current political climate. So much division. So little room for compromise.
It seems like immigration is one of those issues where everybody agrees that something needs to be done, but nobody can agree on what that something is.
Exactly. It's the classic political dilemma.
Right. So let's move on to another topic that's always front and center in any election: the economy.
The economy, the bread and butter issues.
Exactly. The stuff that really hits home for people.
Absolutely. And as you might expect, Trump is eager to remind everyone of what he sees as his economic victories.
He's dusting off that playbook.
Oh, yeah. Tax cuts are back on the menu, especially for corporations.
So we're going back to trickle-down economics.
You could say that he's a big believer in that approach.
And how's that message playing out? There are a lot of people who feel like trickle-down economics doesn't really trickle down to them.
There's definitely some skepticism out there, but for his base, those tax cuts still hold a lot of appeal.
So what about the other side of the coin? What's Harris's economic vision?
Harris is taking a different tack, yeah. She's really focusing on what she calls family-friendly economics.
Family-friendly economics. What does that entail?
Think policies like paid family leave affordable childcare things that directly benefit working families.
So a more targeted approach instead of broad tax cuts.
Exactly. She's really trying to appeal to those voters who feel like they haven't benefited from the economic recovery.
Interesting. So it's a battle of ideologies as much as anything.
It always is when it comes to the economy.
All right, let's pivot to another issue that's deeply personal and politically charged: abortion.
Abortion, you can't talk about the 2024 election without addressing this.
It's the elephant in the room, or maybe the donkey in the room, depending on your perspective.
Right. It's the issue that divides us like no other.
And it's especially significant this time around because it's the first presidential election since Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Exactly. The stakes have never been higher.
So where do the candidates stand on this pivotal issue?
Well, Trump has been surprisingly quiet on the specifics.
Surprising for a guy who's never been shy about sharing his opinions.
I know, right? But he is taking credit for the wave of anti-abortion laws that have been passed across the country.
So reading between the lines.
It seems like he's comfortable letting those laws speak for themselves.
And what about Harris? She's been much more vocal on this issue, hasn't she?
Oh, absolutely. She's been a staunch advocate for abortion rights throughout her career.
And she's made it clear that she would use the power of the presidency to protect those rights.
Exactly. She's even proposed a plan that would require states to get federal approval before enacting any new restrictions on abortion access.
Wow, that's a bold move. Essentially challenging states' rights head on.
It shows how seriously she takes this issue.
No doubt about it. All right, let's shift gears again and talk about another issue that's near and dear to my heart: education.
Education, the great equalizer, or at least it should be.
Right. But unfortunately, in this day and age, it often feels like education is more of a political battleground than anything.
Sadly, that's true.
So give us the rundown. What are the key differences between Harris and Trump when it comes to education?
Well, Harris is all about increasing funding for education across the board.
More money for schools, always a good thing, right?
In theory, yes.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the money. It's about how that money is spent.
Good point. So how would Harris spend that extra money?
She's particularly focused on boosting teacher pay, addressing systemic inequalities, and expanding access to early childhood education.
So investing in the future, basically.
Exactly. She sees education as the key to opportunity and upward mobility.
And what about Trump? What's his vision for the future of American education?
Trump has taken a very different approach. He's been a vocal critic of the Department of Education, and he's called for a significant expansion of school choice programs.
School choice. So basically giving parents more control over where their kids go to school.
Right? The idea is to introduce more competition into the system, which, in theory, should lead to better outcomes for everyone.
But there are concerns that school choice could actually exacerbate existing inequalities.
That's the big debate, isn't it? Whether school choice empowers parents or undermines public education.
And where does Trump land on that debate?
He's firmly in the camp of empowering parents. He believes that parents should have the right to choose the best education for their children, regardless of whether it's a public school, a private school, or a charter school.
So a more market-based approach to education reform.
Exactly. He wants to shake things up,
Yeah.
disrupt the status quo.
And he's also been a vocal critic of what he sees as liberal bias in education, haven't he?
That's right. He's really gone after things like critical race theory and gender ideology in schools.
Those hot-button issues that always seem to get people fired up.
It's all part of his broader culture war strategy.
So a very different vision from Harris, who sees education as a tool for social justice.
Absolutely. It's a classic clash of ideologies.
And speaking of clashes of ideologies, let's move on to an issue that strikes at the very heart of our democracy, January 6th.
January 6th, a dark day in American history.
Yeah, January 6th, it's still something that I think a lot of us are grappling with.
Absolutely. It left a scar on American democracy.
For sure. And it's hard to talk about 2024 without thinking about how January 6th might influence how people vote.
Absolutely. It's going to be a major factor in this election.
So let's address the elephant in the room. How have Harris and Trump responded to January 6th in the context of this upcoming election?
Well, as you might expect, their responses have been drastically different.
Drastically,
Yeah.
that feels like an understatement.
Well, it's true. Trump has continued to downplay the significance of the attack.
He's called it a love fest. He's downplayed the violence.
Exactly. He's even gone so far as to say he would consider pardoning those who are convicted of crimes related to the insurrection.
Which is a pretty terrifying thought for a lot of people.
It is. It suggests that he doesn't see January 6th as the threat to democracy.
Right. And on the flip side, you have Harris, who has made protecting democracy a central theme of her campaign.
Exactly. She's framed it as a fight for the soul of the nation.
So a very different tone, a very different message.
Absolutely. And she's gone beyond just rhetoric. She's proposed concrete measures to protect voting rights, strengthen democratic institutions, and hold those who try to undermine our elections accountable.
So she's putting her money where her mouth is, so to speak.
Exactly. She's trying to show voters that she takes this threat seriously.
And speaking of institutions that are vital to our democracy, let's talk about the one that's perhaps most top of mind for a lot of voters these days, the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court? Ah, yes, the ultimate arbiter of the law.
The big one. And we can't talk about the court without acknowledging the impact that Trump's presidency has already had on it.
3 justices, 3 conservative justices appointed in just 4 years.
3, that's huge. That's a legacy that will last for decades.
It is, and it's already had a profound impact on American law.
Roe v. Wade being the most obvious example.
Exactly. And with several justices now in their 80s, it's very possible that the next president could have the opportunity to appoint even more justices.
Which could tip the balance of the court for a generation.
Absolutely. The stakes are incredibly high.
So let's talk about what a potential second Trump term versus a Harris presidency might mean for the future of the Supreme Court.
Well, if Trump were to get another 4 years, it's safe to assume that he would continue to appoint justices who share his conservative judicial philosophy.
So more of the same, but potentially even more so.
Exactly. He's made it clear that he sees the court as a way to advance his agenda.
And what about Harris? What kind of approach to the court can we expect from her?
Well, Harris has been less vocal about her specific judicial philosophy.
Which is interesting because, she made a name for herself grilling Trump's Supreme Court nominees during those confirmation hearings.
It's true, she was a formidable presence during those hearings. But she hasn't really articulated a clear set of criteria for her own nominees.
So we're left to read the tea leaves a little bit.
To some extent, yes. But based on her record, her statements, and her overall approach to the law, it's safe to assume that she would prioritize appointing justices who believe in a more expansive view of individual rights and who are willing to uphold precedent.
So essentially trying to counterbalance the conservative tilt of the court as it stands now.
Exactly. She sees the court as a protector of individual liberties and a check on executive power.
Which is a very different view from Trump, who sees the court as an extension of his own political will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental difference in how they view the role of the judiciary in American democracy.
So there you have it, folks. We've gone deep. We've explored the potential showdown between Harris and Trump on everything from the economy to foreign policy to the future of the Supreme Court.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, and it's clear that the stakes in this election are incredibly high. The choices we make in 2024 will have a profound impact on the direction of this country for generations to come.
It's a pivotal moment in our nation's history.
It is, and as we always say here at the Deep Dive, knowledge is power.
Absolutely. Informed citizens make the best decisions.
So stay engaged, stay informed, and most